You might be getting a giant tax cut in the year of 2025, but you may not be prepared for how much it will cost. Details from President Trump's one big beautiful bill of tax cuts have now been revealed, showing that they would add $3.7 trillion to the national deficit. Yes, that is adding almost $4 trillion to the deficit, not the debt, the deficit. For context, last year in 2024, the US government spent just under $7 trillion in total spending. However, the US government only took just under $5 trillion in total taxes. The difference between what the government takes in taxes and what it spends is called the deficit. And that difference needs to be made up through borrowing. And the recently proposed tax cuts could add up to $4 trillion to that deficit. In other words, the amount that the US government takes in taxes would shrink drastically. And although this does incorporate a few ways to try and pay for some of those tax cuts, it's not even close to the entire bill, which means total spending is not going to drop significantly and likely will actually even rise. Now, if you were in the same position as the US government here, this would be like you having no savings, your income dropping in half, and you deciding to increase your spending. The only way that's going to be possible is through borrowing, not a smart long-term financial plan. Now, don't get me wrong. I am all for the US government taking less of my money. It belongs to me. I'm going to do better things with it than they will. And that is true of everybody else out there. You will be better off if you get to keep more of your paycheck and you get to invest it and you get to save more and you get to pay down some more debt and you get to spend it on better food, better healthcare, and your community will be better. Everywhere you spend that money will be extra income. That it'll just be better all around. But you also have to take a look at the other side of the coin because the United States government doesn't make purchasing power out of thin air. It can make dollars out of thin air through borrowing, but that's not the same as purchasing power. In other words, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Now, if you want to get access to more of my heretical ideas just like this one, sign up for my free newsletter with the link in the description below. In it, we discuss things like economics, geopolitics, and even what I consider to be some of the most dangerous ideas in America. Plus, I'll give you a few strategies for profiting from the chaos and weathering any storm. Like I said, it's completely free. The link is in the description below. Hope to see you inside. Anytime the US government spends a single dollar, that dollar of purchasing power came from somewhere. If they spent a dollar that they took from taxes, then that dollar came from your paycheck. If they spent a dollar that came from a direct loan, let's say you bought a treasury bond and you decided to loan money to the US government, then again, that $1 that they spent came as a direct transfer from you who loaned it to them. But the one thing that confuses the most people is when neither of those things happens and the government spends money anyway. This is when the US government borrows money into existence that didn't exist before. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not a free lunch. This is still a transfer of purchasing power, but this is the most deceptive because it transfers purchasing power from the entire pool of dollars to the new money that was just created. You can think of this kind of like a stock split just of dollars instead of shares. You can think of this like dilution of purchasing power. You can think of this like a pizza that goes from 8 slices to 16 slices. It's still the same amount of pizza, but there's more slices. Each one is just smaller. And so if we really want a better quality of life, a richer economy, less poverty, more wealth, more abundance, and less scarcity, we don't just need the government to take less money from taxes, we need them to spend less money overall. Now, if you take a look at interest rates on US government debt, you can see the longer term trend over the last couple of years is higher. And we can see that that is even true since the inauguration at the beginning of 2025. And it looks like interest rates are about to break out to the upside. This makes sense if you expect that the US government is going to drastically shrink the amount of money it takes from taxes. It's going to have to make all that up through a lot of extra borrowing. That borrowing is going to be more expensive. Why? Well, because as the US government borrows that money into existence, they spend it into the economy and it bids up the prices of assets, goods, and services. In other words, we get inflation. And lenders want to be compensated for the loss of purchasing power they have while that loan exists before they get paid back. Which means if the US government is going to have to borrow to fund a much larger deficit and growing debt pile, interest rates will have to go up to compensate. This also means that quantitative easing will come back in one of a few forms. Either the Federal Reserve will outright just return to quantitative easing, or we will see some sort of deregulation among banks so that banks can take on that role without the Fed. I think we are slightly more likely to see the latter just because we would need some sort of a financial emergency or catalyst for the Federal Reserve to give an excuse to step back into quantitative easing. They wouldn't do it just from the yields on the 10-year rising uncomfortably high. Now, it is true, lowering taxes, keeping spending high, borrowing the difference will be good for asset prices. Money printing pushes asset prices up first, then it works its way into the economy, bidding up the price of goods and services, and then the final destination is pushing up the prices of wages. Which means that if you know this is coming, which I've been warning that this has been coming for years now, that it doesn't matter who is in power, this is what was going to happen either way, then you can protect yourself. You can buy assets, gold, Bitcoin, stocks, real estate. But if you're poor or you're not paying attention, then the small drop you'll get in the amount of taxes that you are going to pay is probably not going to make up for the fact that your wages will not rise until after your cost of living rises, which means this is unlikely to result in the widespread prosperity that's been promised. Now, at the end of the day, we can't change anything about what they decide to do. We can only look at what is actually going on and then act accordingly to protect ourselves and to profit. Now, if you'd like me to help you apply ideas like this to your investing, click on the link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.